Hello and welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today I'm going to do my top 10 favorite Rhipsalis. A lot of times we kind of lump a lot of smaller flowered epiphytic cacti into Rhipsalis, but we are talking about plants that are truly in the genus Rhipsalis. So I am excluding anything that is a Lepismium, anything that is a Pfeiffera, anything that is a Schlumbergera. The ones that we're looking at today, they're really kind of my favorites for various different reasons. Sometimes it's because they just are so weird or unusual. It might be because it was really hard for me to get. It might be because there's just something about it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes there's just something about it where you're like, there's something about the weirdness of this plant. I really like it and I'm not real sure why. So there are a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's because the flower. Some of them, I think they're unique because they're flower and they just become kind of special to me. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. So number 10 is Rhipsalis clavata. And this is completely the standard form of Rhipsalis clavata. I'm going to preface that here because there is kind of a more slender appearing one where the segments, they seem longer and more slender. And that it's beautiful, but I prefer the standard one. There is something really unique and interesting about the standard one where it's kind of gets this really cool clumping appearance. So you can see that there's like this kind of funny clumping. You can see these segments here. Some of them are kind of fat and like weirdly short and stuff. It's particularly this one that I'm fond of. You can see it's got these skinnier segments, but they stay short. And I really like how it gets sun tinted. So you can see, the red tints here on the parts of the plant that were facing the window, the south facing window. You can particularly see this because it happened on the back side here. See, the plant would have been in the south window and on the back side, it's all beautifully tinted red. Now she's outside, so I'm sure she'll get even more red. But you can see just how beautiful this plant is, and it will turn into this giant clumping hanging monster of a plant if you put it in a pot where it has the room to do so. So this was hard to find as well. It was easy to find a lot of the skinnier ones, but it was really hard to find one that was the standard form that had the bigger segments. So I was really happy to have found that. I believe that I picked this up. It was either like on Etsy or eBay. I kind of think it was on Etsy. And it was quite a while ago, so I'm not super sure that I quite remember where. I just think that it was on Etsy. And super cool though. Super cool. I absolutely love it. When it came to me, it was potted in sphagnum moss. So that's something else. I repotted it in my epiphytic cacti mix. It's too wet here to do that kind of thing. I think in a climate where it's a little bit drier, sphagnum moss would be an absolutely wonderful way to grow this plant. But isn't it cool? And it has these beautiful little bell flowers, these beautiful white bell-shaped flowers. And the flowers are completely white. So they don't have any tints in their center or anything like that. They're completely little white bell-shaped flowers. And they generally just come right out of the end, and it can be one of the most glorious looking things you have ever seen. I feel like these are really underrated. It's very strange because you don't see them anywhere near as often as the other Rhipsalis, which is an absolute shame. But this would be Rhipsalis Pittieri. Not sure if I'm saying that right. At one point, I believe that this was listed as a subspecies underneath Rhipsalis Floccosa, but I think it ended up being its own species. And so there's a couple of really interesting things that I think about this plant. One, I think this plant looks like Bucatini. So in a lot of the other Rhipsalis, they're like spaghetti. They'll call them like the spaghetti cactus. This one's like the Bucatini cactus. And truly, this is like the size of Bucatini. It's even kind of, everything about it is very Bucatini-ish. This is interesting too because these only grow to a set determined length. So this segment really is only this long. and it will continuously grow segments about this long, whether they grow straight out of the end, because this is another segment here that's this long, or whether they actually multiply out of the end like this. You see that they will only grow about that long. It is a long, beautiful, elegant hanging plant, and this one I believe came from Horticult LLC, and I bought it as a large plant like this. I believe this one has flowers that are very similar to Rhipsalis floccosa, so they would be kind of a whitish color, and they're really pretty flowers. But this one would also have flowers that I think are a little bit smaller. So I think this looks a lot like Rhipsalis floccosa in a lot of ways. It's just smaller. Rhipsalis floccosa. I don't know what the deal is with me and this plant. I have just this strange affinity for this. So this is thicker, and this can get really thick. I have some that I imported that are really interesting because they have these really old, like wizened woody branches that are legitimately about the diameter of a dime. So they can get pretty thick, but this seems to be kind of the standard here. So this would be quite a bit thicker than Bucatini. I don't know if there is a pasta that's thicker than Bucatini, but it is thicker than that. And the segments here, once again, they do grow to a determined length, but they are grown longer. Now, there are several subspecies of Rhipsalis floccosa. This one, I think, is probably Rhipsalis floccosa tucumanensis. I don't know if I'm saying that right either, but there we go. And it's just really cool. Again, super underrated. I don't know why I don't see these more often because they're so cool. You can see this beautiful. It's just like blasting out with new growth. This one here, I believe I found on eBay. And I buy almost every time I see a Rhipsalis floccosa, I kind of buy it because I have a thing for them. This one here, I probably got from the same place. It looks like it. Yeah, I can see the label. So this person must just be like, man, this chick just keeps buying my Rhipsalis floccosa. Here's another really interesting thing about this guy, is that some Rhipsalis, it's interesting because they will have, like, the areoles are actually underneath their flesh here, so they're hidden. And what happens sometimes with them is when they bloom, the bloom starts to form underneath the skin. And then whenever the bud gets big enough, it actually punches through that skin. And then, and only then, is the true areole actually exposed. And some of them, it's really cool because they have this like wool that is inside of that areole. So this is the case with this one. You can see that there is some wool there because it bloomed, and then you can see it kind of has left this like crater that's going to happen there. Once all of that wool, because you can totally pull that wool out, but once all of that wool kind of falls out, you'll be left with something of a scar. Hard to see, but see the little wool? Really cool. Because there's a few different subspecies of this guy, they do have slightly different appearances in their flowers. Like some of the flowers are more just kind of white, some of them are a whitish greenish color, some of them are a whitish yellowish color. I believe that they're a little bit hard to identify, the different subspecies, mostly because they're not really seen often enough. Coming in at number 7 is Rhipsalis Neves-armondii, form Megalantha. This is weird Rhipsalis. This Rhipsalis is very strange. It is very thick. It has these very, very thick branches, and they grow in these kind of whorls that come out like this. So you see at the end, and they are determinate. So they have a very set length to the branches. As you can see, this is growing very strangely. It's like, what? That's an upright kind of Rhipsalis. However, not exactly. So as this matures and it gets bigger and bigger, it will kind of like bush and then start to be pendant. But even then it grows in a real weird kind of looking form. It has the honor of having the largest Rhipsalis flower. This has a huge flower relative to all of the other Rhipsalis, really. it is a gorgeous flower. So like not only does it get to have a big flower, it gets to have one of the most beautiful flowers. So it's white and it has this kind of vibrant pinkish orange kind of center, and it's followed by these also ginormous sort of like purple berries. This does some cool things, and you'll see this a lot with a lot of the Rhipsalis that have those kind of hidden areoles like that. This is another Rhipsalis that is like that has these hidden areoles. As the growth starts to come out, what happens is because those areoles are hidden, the new growth can get just like a little bit stuck in there and it'll create these loops. I think that's super cool, and it's really fun with this one because it's so big and weird that it creates these like real big weird loops. It will leave like a little skin from it having punched through the outer layers there. And so the same thing with the flower, and because this one has such a large flower, it actually leaves really large craters in these branches. Coming in at number 6 is Rhipsalis Hoelleri. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that one right either, but this one is pretty cool because this is one of those real long, beautiful, elegant types of plants that you see quite often. And you know, the ones that like you really see the Instagram photos of and stuff like that because it's just that cool. So this has really thin cylindrical stems. They're not very thick. And you can see that this one, unlike some of the other ones, doesn't really seem to have determinate growth. It seems like these can get pretty darn long. And they are all kind of various different sizes generally. Like this is one long continuous growth before it kind of stopped right there. And I think the only reason why it stopped is likely because it got a little bit damaged. But you can see that there are smaller growths as well. So this truly looks like spaghetti. It looks just like spaghetti. The thickness of it is even spaghetti-like. Now, again, this is one that has hidden areoles. This plant boasts something really cool that isn't real common in the Rhipsalis world. This particular plant has a unique colored flower. Most of the Rhipsalis flowers are white, mostly, possibly tinted with some other kind of color. So they might be tinted with yellow or tinted with green or tinted with pink. This one particularly has this sort of purplish reddish kind of flower. So it's unique in that way. And that little flower, it's got those hidden areoles. So again, it will punch through and then it will leave little pockmarks, little scars on these branches. But it has just the coolest flower and it creates these beautiful cascades of this, just absolutely stunning. I can't wait till any of mine bloom. I have quite a few of these because some plants I just keep buying because they're cool. There's a wild child coming in at number 5. This would be Rhipsalis Paradoxa subspecies Septentrionalis. This plant is cool. It's not one that you see very often. You see a lot of plants labeled as this, but it's usually not real. There are some really neat things about this plant. You can see about the thickness here of these segments. It's fairly thick. Nowhere near as thick as, Rhipsalis Paradoxa, but it's pretty thick, and they're definitely thicker than something like Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis subspecies Catanulata. And they're interesting because the segments, they are a determinate length. Now, that's not something that you see with Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis subspecies Catanulata. They'll grow pretty darn long. These, and even Rhipsalis Paradoxa, the branches can go pretty long, but this one is set. It really seems to have a very set kind of growth pattern in general. So you can see that they branch out, and then they might produce branches out of the end of the branch. So you can see this one grew 3 right out of the end of this, and then there's like 1 further up off of the side. But one of the things that's very telltale is notice the length here. The length of this branch is that long. The length of this branch is that long. The length of this branch is that long. So it has a determined set growth length. Here you can see the same thing, which you see this main branch here, and then you see it branch out. They're about the same length, and you see these guys branch out, and they're about the same length. So that's one identifying characteristic of this plant. Another identifying characteristic of this plant is whenever it blooms. So when it blooms, particularly as the bloom starts to fade, the color of the bloom is going to be yellowish. Pretty strong yellowish the further it fades as well. So those are real defining characteristics of this plant. It's a pretty rare plant. It's not one that you find very often. However, there is this lady that sells on eBay that she just sort of, I believe that she calls this one a pickle cactus. So she has the correct name on it as well. It's not the first time that I've seen her sell something kind of remarkable that was fairly rare. And I'm really grateful to sort of have this plant in my collection. I'm grateful to be able to actually show you guys what the real species is supposed to look like as well. Because let's be honest, Rhipsalis identification is horrifying. So I bet several of you are immediately like, I know what that plant is, but I bet a lot of you are wrong. This plant is actually, it shares an interesting characteristic with another species, which I believe that on site, this one could quite commonly be confused with that. But this is actually Rhipsalis Neves-armondii. It's the standard form. I have more than one of these. And this is the one that I'm going to show. And this I actually purchased from the same lady that was selling the pickle cactus. So I think that, she made a comment, I think, in her description of this that made me kind of wonder. So I felt kind of like I had to purchase it. But it has a beautiful flower. So the flower looks just like the Megalantha flower, kind of, only it's smaller. And it is one of the most beautiful Rhipsalis flowers, in my opinion. It's because it has the stamen, and they are like this weird kind of iridescent sort of pinkish orange color. It's really fascinating. However, there's actually two different clones that have two different colored sort of stamen, or the throat of the flower, really. So there's that pinkish orange, and then there's another one that is yellow. And in the description, when the lady kind of sold this, she made a note that the flowers were small and sort of yellowish. So I'm hoping that I somehow miraculously managed to collect both of them. That would be really cool, because I do have the orangish pinkish one, and it is just knock your socks off flower. And you know what? That plant, fantastic, because it just never stops blooming. It just blooms and blooms and blooms, and it just bloomed all throughout kind of the fall and winter for me, just randomly. It was just fantastic. The way that the growth is here is that it is determinate. This will not just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. So they will only grow so long. And you can see here, this right here, from here to here, is about the longest that any of these branches seem to have grown. And then they just kind of whirl out, and some of them can be a little bit shorter and some of them can be a little bit longer. Now, the other one that I have that has the orangish sort of pinkish flower is kind of interesting, because it doesn't seem to quite have, it seems to have a little bit more of a bushier kind of appearance, not like overly so, but a little bit, a little bit more like Megalantha does. So kind of interesting with that little bit of variation there. And the thing that confuses this guy with another species so much is these areoles. See how the areoles, these are they're hidden once again. So the areoles are actually hidden underneath the flesh, but you can see that they have this kind of dark spot. See that kind of dark spot that's on there? So it causes a lot of confusion with another species. What's interesting here is, once again, the bloom will form underneath there. It will punch through and it will leave scars. Scars like this. So here you can see all these little scars that whoa, that guy's all crazy. All these little scars that are all along this branch here. And you can see just how many there are some big scars there. How many big scars are there? And that gives you an idea of just how much this plant likes to bloom. It's a very bloomy plant. And this is a really sad plant. But coming in at number 3 is Rhipsalis Puniceodiscus. Now, you know, this is such a sad thing, but this plant is really, really, really hard to get in the United States. So I actually imported it from Germany last year, or I tried to anyway. Now, Rhipsalis, they do not travel well, so they don't always make it, and they can be in some really rough shape traveling like that. And so this guy, to be honest, the only reason why I even placed the order was because I wanted this plant, and I just couldn't find it in the United States. And so what ended up happening is that I got it, but it was just like one of them was completely dead and just dry and desiccated, and the other one just was like these little twigs like this. And it just, you know, big parts of it were dead, and I was like, oh man, you know. So, I mean, I potted it up and stuff like that, and it is growing. So I'm really happy to see that. And it is a plant that I know to be very lively, you know, one that I know to grow very quickly and just very crazy. So the super crazy thing about this plant is that this plant has just this completely indeterminate growth. So it will just grow and grow and grow. And again, it has these kind of spaghetti-like branches, only this one is not quite indicative of how thick this can get. Because here's the thing, because this is so small and sad, it doesn't quite have enough oomph yet to like really grow how it should be growing. So I'm going to say that these can get much thicker than this. So this right here, it looks kind of like al dente spaghetti thickness. However, this will get much thicker than this. And it is in fact thicker than Rhipsalis hoelleri. So this guy right here, it just looks kind of thin, but it will just keep growing and growing and growing out of the ends here. And you can see how cute. I have all this like new little growth coming. So you can see how robust it is even for something that was a little bit banged up like this. But this is the one that you really see a lot of pictures of. It grows like just insane, crazy long, beautiful hanging hair-like plant. It is gorgeous, gorgeous plant. And just like a lot of the other ones that we've talked about and we looked at, I want to make the comment here that the one that we previously looked at, Rhipsalis Neves-armondii form, the standard form, Neves-armondii, those dark areoles that it has, this species gets those same real dark areoles. Now, one of the differences, there are a few differences, and I am just going to talk about those briefly. So it will get those very dark areoles, which is a telltale sign when you see a plant that has this long, indeterminate, like crazy growth like that, and it has those dark areoles. You can just almost just bet that it is Rhipsalis Puniceodiscus. It also, it has growth that is shiny-ish. So it's interesting because the new growth on this is super shiny. And that is, you know, a lot of Rhipsalis, their new growth will be shiny, but this is super, super shiny. And it maintains a green appearance. Whereas Rhipsalis hoelleri, it has this kind of dusty, sort of grayish green color to its branches. So that's something to note if you're trying to, you know, tell the different plants apart. This has a gorgeous flower. So much like Rhipsalis Neves-armondii, this guy has this beautiful flower, and I believe its areoles are also hidden. So they will punch through those little dark areoles, and they will leave some scars or markings on the branches. And coming in at number 2 here, this is a real treat, I think. This I just got yesterday. And once again, I imported this kid all the way from Europe. So I imported this kid from Germany, and this would be Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, subspecies Pacheco-leonis. So The one that we all see a lot more commonly is Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis subspecies Catanulata. That's the one that looks like a small version of Rhipsalis paradoxa, subspecies Paradoxa. So this is a crazy treat. So I imported this mostly because I have this theory. So I think we see this plant quite a more often than we know. So I think that the problem with this has become that this plant is so horrifyingly misidentified that we are losing the real plant in misidentification. I quite commonly see a plant floating around that I have on multiple occasions looked at, and I grow it and I've looked at it and I've been like, you know, I really think that that is Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, subspecies Pacheco-leonis. I think this is weirdly misidentified. And I purchased this. I went out of my way to get one that I knew was confirmed, that I saw the bloom picture because I want to see if they are the same plant. And this is really cool because the growth on this is not actually indicative of totally the way that it grows, but I think that there is a couple of really neat things about this. So this, unfortunately, because of its traveling, is very desiccated, but because of that, the sort of like chaining on this is a lot more prominent than it would otherwise be. So make note that whenever this fattens up, this will not be quite so prominent. But there are a few things. One is that you can see that these branches, they have a determinate length. So they always seem to sort of have a really kind of specific sort of length for these particular branches. But I have also seen this plant throw out a very different kind of growth. It's kind of, it looks like caterpillars or something, but this one I believe does it consistently. It is generally this looks like it's an upright thing, but that's just because I have these cuttings planted upright like this. It is a pendant plant. It grows very long, very pendant, and it grows this growth combined with whatever that crazy caterpillarish type growth is. You can see about how thick these stems are. And one of the really interesting things about this is just really crazy. Rhipsalis paradoxa and Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, they are two totally different species. But what's really funny about that is that Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, subspecies Catanulata, looks like a small version of Rhipsalis paradoxa, subspecies Paradoxa, whereas this looks like a smaller version. So this being Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, subspecies Pacheco-leonis, kind of looks like a smaller version of Rhipsalis paradoxa, subspecies Septentrionalis. This flower will be kind of a purplish color, a light purplish color, or a maybe kind of a light brownish color, I guess. I'm also really, really glad to have been able to get a really confirmed version of this plant to really, you know, show, because I just think that's really fascinating and really cool. And I hope that kind of helps people with some of their identification stuff. Why don't we kind of zoom in a little bit too? Because this guy's got like really neat growth. So see how that looks? It has more segments really. And see how they alternate? See how they're like alternating like that? It's really, really cool. Really interesting and cool looking. Coming in at number 1 is Rhipsalis Dissimilis form. Dissimilis. I can almost guarantee you that the other form of this, if I had the plant, would probably be pretty high up there in this list as well. So that would be Rhipsalis Dissimilis form Epiphytic. But that's really a very, very uncommon Rhipsalis. So this one is just the standard form Dissimilis. This one I managed to find on Etsy. Now the thing is that this used to go under somewhat of a different name. It used to go under the name Rhipsalis Dissimilis variety Marinerianum. So you can still find it under that name. And This is just a cool plant. I think that this has just the most fantastic flowers. So my obsession with this plant is over its flowers. It has really unusual growth for Rhipsalis too. So you can sort of see that it has, once again, it has this determinate sort of growth where you can see it kind of grow out. There's two different kinds of forms of growth that are going on here. So you can see here there's a more kind of rounder one, and then it's kind of chained, and see how this one ended up being shorter. And then you can see this is the kind of more standard growth that it puts out. And you can see again that this has sort of that alternating segment thing going on, but there's something inconsistent about it. Like, it's not perfect. It's kind of weirdly randomish looking. Now, they all kind of generally look the same-ish. See what I mean? But not quite. They're not real perfect mirrors of each other. So it also can get growth that it will be just kind of more round looking. Now, this also has, you know, this kind of interesting thing with the areoles. The only difference is that this one will actually just kind of punch through with this wool, I think, without even blooming. Like, the wool will actually make its way out. So this can get these little woolly ends like this, which is just really, really cool. See these little woolly ends? If you have a large plant of this might be a good example, and you might be able to be like, oh, that's my plant. But because this is just a small specimen, you aren't really seeing like the big bushiness of this plant. So this plant can get, it turns into like this big kind of beautiful hanging plant. And as it matures, it will have this kind of growth quite a bit. However, that's not the only kind of growth this also has. It also gets this, what I like to call caterpillar growth. So the one that we just previously looked at, Rhipsalis Pacheco-leonis, subspecies Pacheco-leonis, is the same thing that I was talking about. It will get caterpillar growth like this. And so this one also does that same crazy thing. Now, this is one that I also I had imported too. So I imported this one just yesterday, I think out of just general curiosity. And you can see it's got the same kind of growths here, although it's a little more desiccated. And look at all that wool. I mean, look at how much wool is coming out of the areoles on this. There's just so much wooliness happening. And then you can see just how much of this kind of caterpillar growth is coming out. So in a younger stage, it can produce a large amount of this caterpillary growth. And then as it matures, it can start getting these more normal branches. So be aware of that there might be kind of an oddity there in your plant's growth with this. There we go. That would be my top 10 Rhipsalis. Let me know what yours are in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and happy cacti growing.